Hello there, and welcome to the Trauma-Informed Care in the Long-Term Care Organization video series. The title of this segment is Grief and Mourning. My name is Paige Hector, and I am an advanced practice social worker working in the post-acute and long-term care setting for almost 30 years. I have lots of interests and passions in this space, but some of them include obviously trauma-informed care, clinical operations for the interdisciplinary team, as well as process improvement. I write columns for two well-known publications, and I'm involved in several national work groups and committees. So my bio will be available at the end of the presentation. Here is the list of the video series, and as you can see highlighted here, number 8, Grief and Mourning. So you can see where we are in the sequence of topics. We're going to talk about the difference between grief and mourning, what we are mourning, the idea of radical acceptance, the ways that we minimize mourning, how to be present with grief, peer support, and debriefing. So we have a lot to cover here. Let's talk about acceptance, grief, and mourning. The difference between grief and mourning is that grief is something that's internal. It's the sadness, anxiety, the anger, the longing, whatever our feelings are on the inside as we experience whether it's a death, a loss, something that has happened in our life for which we are grieving. It's internal. The mourning is an external expression, something that we typically share with other people, hopefully trusted people, that it might be some kind of action or symbol or ceremony or ritual. So, mourning, I think, is most clearly associated with the death of someone. So in some cultures, there's very specific mourning practices or rituals and memorial services. So it's important to understand that we can mourn any type of loss, including death, of course, but it can be mourning the loss of independence, mourning the loss of a job, or mourning a change in our lives, or it can be just about anything. So I want us to be able to expand the grief and mourning concept to beyond what we traditionally associate it with around death. So here's some different things that we might be mourning. Of course, death is first and foremost, but illnesses and loss of friendships, the loss of normalcy, or at least processes of how we understood things that would normally work. Especially in light of the pandemic, everything we kind of knew about our nursing homes and the way things traditionally worked was basically thrown out the window. We had to learn and relearn processes and stuff over and over. The grief around that and the ability to mourn that unpredictability, that this is really, really hard. The loss of a sense of purpose or feelings of insecurity, tenderness around issues around guilt and helplessness and sadness. And some people have actually been questioning perhaps why they want to stay in healthcare, or wondering what would they do differently if they left. So there's so much to mourn right now, and mourning is a very healthy, natural expression. The radical acceptance concept is basically accepting the way that things are right now. Like I have here, is that this is happening right now. I do not like it, but I can handle it. It does not mean that you have to like it, or that you accept it, or that you aren't going to try to change what's happening. It simply means the acceptance of the reality that includes the sadness, the pain, the loss, without resistance. So again, it doesn't mean that you won't try to make things better. It just means that I'm going to hold both. I'm going to accept the grief and the loss, the pain and the sadness. At the same time, I'm going to make a choice to focus my energy on collaborating and building partnerships and working together and problem solving, rather than expending my very precious limited energy on resisting a painful reality. I tend to think in visualizations. To me, it came up as a bridge. So as I thought about the idea of accepting what is allows us to mourn what is not. So to me, that was a beautiful idea of a bridge. So we're over here accepting what is, what's happened, what's going on, and what has happened, allows us to cross that bridge and to mourn what isn't. This is actually a real bridge, by the way. It's in Germany. We have a tendency to minimize or trivialize mourning. It's, I think, socialized in us that it's a very uncomfortable place, and this does not describe everyone. I think there's some people that are very comfortable being around an individual who is in a state of grief, who is mourning. But some of the things that we tend to do, and some of them are just so unconsciously, we don't even realize that's happening. So as you look at this list, I wonder if any of these either you have done to another person, or perhaps someone has done to you when you were mourning, expressing grief and sadness and loss around something that's happened in your life. We change the subject because sometimes talking about things that are distressing or sad, it's really hard. It's hard. We might say things like, well, look at the bright side, or the silver lining, or the gift. Offering advice is a big one. We tend to think that if someone is hurting or in a state of grief or mourning, that somehow we have to fix it for them, and we don't. Simply being present is all we have to do. Quiet, comforting presence. We don't have to fix. We don't have to do anything except be present. So all of these things here, these are all the ways that we minimize or trivialize mourning. Why is it so difficult to grieve and mourn in the nursing home? Well, there's several reasons. One of them is that in terms of trauma-informed care principles, to have a safe and trusting environment where people are truly free to express when they are feeling grief, when they need to mourn, whether it's the death of a resident, an illness of a resident, a loss of a process, the loss of normalcy, all of those things. If staff do not feel safe to grieve and to mourn, that could be one of the barriers. Even if your culture expresses outwardly, yes, that's fine, but if we don't support staff to actually grieve and to mourn, then there's another barrier in place there. Some other challenges, and this is specifically related to death, staff are expected to detach and reattach over and over. So when people come and they move into our communities, perhaps as a rehab patient or a long-term care resident, and for whatever reason, either they are discharged or they die, they move out, or whatever it is, staff, they get connected and then they have to let go. They have to reconnect and then they have to let go again. This can be really wearing on people, and I don't think it's something we talk about enough. We have pressure to maintain census, which of course, I think we all understand that, because if we don't have residents and patients to care for, we don't have revenue coming in, we don't have a business, we don't have a nursing home, we don't have jobs. But at the same time, the flip side of that is that when we've had a loss or a death of a resident, the pressure to fill that bed really quickly without allowing staff to grieve and to mourn the loss is actually very detrimental. If we could maybe do a little bit more to support staff to attend funerals, off-site funerals could give them a sense of mourning and contribution, or at least collaboration with the family. And then there's a pressure to deal with it. Well, we're healthcare. Of course people are going to die. We have to deal with it. Get on, move on. We have more work to do. And that pervasive atmosphere in our culture, it was summarized so beautifully in this book I just finished reading recently, Why Cope When You Can Heal? And the authors talked about this idea of a just get over it culture. It dominates in healthcare, that we have no time to process any of our emotions. And when we don't have time to process our emotions, what we've been through, how we're feeling about things, that can actually contribute to post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. People don't have the time or ability to pause and reflect and process the way that the crisis continues to grind away at them. So for the leaders that are listening to this webinar, I encourage you, talk about this with your staff. What are some ideas of how we can weave into our daily care the ability to talk about grief and to mourn? I recently took a nonviolent communication class with just an amazing instructor, Yoram Mosensen, and he kept saying that we are human beings, not human doings. That really spoke to me, that we are so intent, and this is, I know all of us, Whether I'm at work or at home, it's always do, and do more, do it quicker, do it faster, more lists. And I just want to breathe sometimes and say, stop. We are human beings, not human doings. A colleague of mine, Carla Cheatham, wrote a fantastic blog series about grief. She titled it, "What is it about grief that's so scary and hard?" And it's a series. She called it The Being with Suffering Grief. The theme of it is, what is it that's so scary and hard about being with grief? There's 7 blogs. They're very short, very easy reads. So here's all of the titles for all 7 days. What she talks about here is that being with others in pain can be difficult for a couple of reasons, because it reminds us of our own vulnerability, of things that are scary and bad that can happen in life. Or it reminds us that we have our own pains and fears and things that we've not yet addressed or dealt with. And being present with someone who's in a similar state of grief, it's really painful for us. Sometimes there's barriers because we don't know what to say, we don't know what to do. And there it is, that need to fix it again. Being uncomfortable with silence. If we can at least be comfortable with allowing just silence for people to be present and to process what they're going through, that could be a very wonderful step as we all get more comfortable with breathing and mourning. Acknowledging that sometimes it's necessary and so cathartic and wonderful to get professional help. If we as healthcare providers can remove the stigma of staff of requesting and getting assistance, remembering that in terms of trauma is an injury. It is not an illness. So imagine if you were injured physically, a broken leg or an exacerbation of an illness, you would seek medical attention. It's the same thing with trauma, is that trauma is a mental, it's an emotional, it is a physical injury, that it's the same idea of seeking assistance for that, seeking help. So being present with grief, again, whether it's grief, the internal expression, the internal experience, or mourning, the external expression, calm, quiet presence. In other words, you're relaxed, there's no agenda, you're not going to step in with advice or tell them how to fix it or problem solve with them or try to figure out what they can do next. Simple statements like, "This hurts so much." Allowing for tears and expressions. Asking, "Is the grief like a wave?" Letting them time to talk about it. What does it feel like? How do they feel it in their body? What are their biggest fears? So when the time is right, gentle, very simple questions. But first and foremost, the essence is presence, and that means silence. Gifting ourselves and one another permission. So the idea of radical acceptance includes making room for the discomfort, the pain, and the sadness. So it's like gifting permission to one another, and that includes the gift of self-permission to slow down, to breathe, to grieve, and eventually to mourn with another person, someone that you trust. One of the things we can do in our facilities and our nursing homes is provide psychoeducation on grief and mourning. If we can normalize it and say, we're working towards understanding this better. We know that we're hurting, especially in terms of the pandemic and all the loss and change. Here are some resources, some things that if you're interested, you can read about, or here's some resources for you to get some assistance. Are there peer support groups that we can establish in our nursing homes, or other ideas that you might come up with to help support people and give the gift of permission? You know, crying is a tender place. A lot of times when people cry, it's interesting how they tend to apologize. "I'm so sorry for crying. I'm so sorry." When that happens with me, with someone, and they say those words to me, I very quietly and gently thank them. I thank them for allowing me to be present with their grief. I thank them for trusting me. Biologically speaking, when we cry, that's a very natural way to release hormones and toxins from our body. It can be uncomfortable because when we see another person crying, and again, we're socialized to do something, fix it, make it stop, make them feel better, because we're so uncomfortable being around another person's pain or grief. Back to the basics. The essence is presence, allowing space to bear witness to the grief and the suffering, and there's no need to fix it. Trust in their ability to be on that journey themselves, but walk with them if they desire. There's a vulnerability, as staff, we get very attached to residents, patients, one another, even families. And we've been through so much. There's so much grief and loss lately with the pandemic and what we've been through. It's very normal, it's natural to need to show emotion and allow that to bubble up when it's appropriate. I know it's a balance, it's a fine line. If we constantly have staff that are, in states of grief and mourning, especially around residents and families, that's probably not healthy for anyone. That person needs support and permission and care. But at the same time, when we are present with someone and they are suffering and grieving and the tears come, if your tears come as well, I encourage you to be vulnerable in that moment. Allow the tears to come. Allow that person to see, I'm struggling too. This is so hard. I hear you. I'm with you. We tend to want to offer people a tissue. If a person is crying, we quickly hand them a tissue. And I just want to ask you to think about that simple action, which I have no doubt is probably done with the utmost of care, but think about the way that might be perceived. I hand you a tissue when you're crying. Is that perceived as a action of comfort or of discomfort? In other words, could it be perceived that I'm so uncomfortable with you crying, here's a tissue, please don't cry, here's a tissue. It's not that we don't offer tissues, because I always share when I talk about this particular concept, when I cry, it's kind of a wet, messy affair. I'm looking for a tissue because I need one. My nose is running and it's just very uncomfortable. But at the same time, if someone hands me tissue, oh, don't cry, that's not comfortable either. So what I tell people is just have tissues all over the place. Have them available, readily available, especially if you know that you're going to be present with someone in which there might be some grief or some mourning. Make sure the tissues are within reach. Peer support is a significant part of mourning. Peer support, if you remember, is one of the, I think it's the third trauma-informed care principle. And what this means is that when people have experienced a similar event, it could be any number of events. Maybe it's something that happened in your nursing home, obviously the experience of the pandemic and COVID, and providing time and space for people to grieve, to reminisce, to gather after a loss, after distressing news, or even death. So it's beyond just death, that we need to come together and support one another many different times, many different reasons. One of the ways we can do that is with debriefing. A debrief is something that I think is more familiar in the acute care space. Would love to see more of it coming into our post-acute and long-term care settings. It's actually time that's built into the day or into the week where people can come together to talk about, to grieve, to reminisce, to tell stories, and to share with one another and feel the camaraderie and the support of each other, the peer support. There are all different ways to do this, but let me just give you a brief overview. Generally speaking, a debrief is something that's safe. It's constructive. It's sharing and active listening. It is not a time when we're not fixing stuff for other people. It's not a time for me to come in and say, well, you should have done this or you should have done that. No. A debrief is a time to express, to allow people to talk about their experience, their perception, their experience. There's no blaming and criticism, no judgment. The purpose is for us to share a sense of purpose with each other, a shared sense of a common goal, what we're trying to do together, and focus on learning. So again, it's not venting, it's not a complaint session, it's not a time to fix people or whatever is happening. It's more of a time of learning. So it's growth and learning. We share, we grieve, we mourn, and then we talk about, are there learning moments? What did we do well? What might we do differently the next time? So the thing about debriefing, though, is that when people have a need to grieve or to mourn, if our debriefings are, let's say, once a week at a specified time or once a month, that may not be frequent enough. So I always encourage people, have a process for informal debriefing as well, and how that looks like and how that process would look in your community might be very different. So it's something you and your team can talk about. I encourage you to include everyone, and this is operational and clinical staff. Please keep in mind that housekeepers, central supply people, business office people, life development, pharmacy, medical providers, the rehab staff, there are so many people in our communities that are all working so very hard. And sometimes I worry that staff that are not traditionally seen as clinical staff, that ones that attend the morning meeting or the interdisciplinary meetings or those sorts of venues, I wonder if sometimes they feel left out. So please how do we include everyone? Compassionate and mindful sharing. As we share and debrief with one another, as we share the stories about what we've been through, there's a way to do that. So I want to talk about a concept, and I'll introduce that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about this term. This is actually a professional term. It's called sliming. So basically what this is that when a person goes to another person and debriefs with them and starts telling them a story about something that's happened without warning or permission or choice, and that person feels like they have now been given all of this graphic, sometimes graphic, very detailed, distressing information. They had no say in it, they may not have wanted it, and they weren't ready for it. So the person feels literally like they're carrying the weight of unnecessarily graphic or traumatic information. Then what happens is now they're so distressed, they're going to go share it with someone else. So this process of sliming continues to go and to go and to go. So what can we do differently? First of all, acknowledge debriefing, like I just said, is so important. It's very much needed in the healthcare setting. It's natural to want to debrief, but we need to be more aware of how we go about doing it. In other words, that we do it in a way that's supportive and validating and not harmful or traumatic to the person in receipt of the information. So that's where low impact debriefing comes in. First of all, you have to have self-awareness of the story. Basically, that is thinking about what you want to debrief or what you want to share, and then being very aware of how much of this story is relevant for me to share. Do I really need to go into this much detail, or is it okay to do a high level? And then what you really want to focus on is how does that experience affect me? So that's where what you would talk about more, rather than the event itself. You're talking about how you're experiencing it. When you want to debrief with someone, this could be a formal or an informal process, give a fair warning, kind of like volleying that ball over to say, hey, I'm wondering if I'd like to talk with you about a difficult situation. Some of it has traumatic content. And then ask for consent. Allow the person the ability to say, yes, I'm available to listen to you, or you know what, I really don't have the capacity for that right now, or hey, give me 10, let me grab a cup of coffee, I'll meet you in my office and we'll sit and talk, or let me listen to you. The other thing I want to make it very clear here is I want to empower everyone. You have the ability to say no. So if a colleague of yours or someone comes and they start debriefing with you and sharing something that's very traumatic or graphic, it's okay. Please know that you have permission to say, excuse me, I need you to stop. This is really hard for me to hear. I'm wondering if you could share your story with me, but leave out some of those graphic details. That person then has a choice. We need to know that we have permission. The example I usually give here is, in my family, I have very clear lines about anything related to children and animals. So if my family sees a story about something, an animal being injured or a child, they know, don't talk to Paige about it. Do not tell me about it, because those are my boundaries. That material is really hard for me. I can handle just about everything else, healthcare related and that sort of stuff, but we all have limitations and boundaries, and it's an act of compassion to share that with another person so we don't inadvertently harm other people. Okay, so that overall is low impact debriefing. I hope that you can talk about this in your facilities and see how you might use this concept to support all of you. As I have in every one of my videos, I'm asking you to think about your action steps. So by next Monday or whatever day makes sense, fill in. I'll share this information with. So do something going forward. Thank you for your time. Again, here is my bio, and I want to just acknowledge and give my gratitude for the Care Compass Network and Finger Lakes Geriatric Education Center for making this video series possible. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next topic.